we're having our event on compliance with cocktails. I have a few folks joining with me. To introduce myself, I'm Brian Kordelski. I run the data and analytics sales team over here at Prolifics. And we are focused today on compliance, CCPA, and GDPR. I've got a few speakers that will be joining me today, and you'll see them up on both on camera, and they have several parts of this presentation. The first one is our risk and compliance czar, Ron Davis. Ron Davis is the Director of Information Governance and Data Privacy. He will be kind of talking through the overall process for compliance, and then we will be joined by a customer who we've known for a long time, Karen Jackson, who is the Manager of Corporate Applications at ABS, and ABS is the American Bureau of Shipping. Karen is responsible for the GRC applications over there globally, and her practice includes data governance, enterprise modernization, automation, and data warehousing. We've been working with Karen for quite some time on both the GDPR and CCPA types of applications, and Karen will be sharing some of her war stories throughout the process. So thank you all for joining us. I hope you brought a cocktail. We look forward to having this conversation with you, and please feel free to put as many questions as you want into the chat box. We have audience participation at the end, and we'll be sharing some information and having a conversation with you. So let's get started. Ron, over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Brian, and happy Friday Eve to everyone. And I'm going to stick with my Pellegrino water because I've got to be able to talk and think. So I'm sticking with Pellegrino for now. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Brian, go ahead. Next slide, please. I wanted to start off just level setting a little bit about while the data privacy concerns and laws are sweeping across the globe, I wanted to bring it a little bit closer to home in this session and talk a little bit about the data privacy, the state of data privacy among the states throughout the US. And I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on this map, but the point behind this is to highlight the fact that the various states, as you see in the different colors here, are all at various stages of the legislative bill process. And as you see in the bright red, there are actually 3 states that have already passed their data privacy legislation. CCPA being the California one, and then of course Nevada and Maine. And as you see in the other colors, there's a number of states that have the bills going into the committee and to the cross chamber as a part of just going through the process toward being signed. And the point behind this is simply to say that in addition to the global aspect, such as GDPR and Canada's PEPIDA version of privacy, all of these laws are kind of coming through at different times, going to hit at different points in time, and actually are going to contain various different aspects and privacy law regulations. Okay, next slide, Brian. A few key points that I like to highlight just to make sure that we level set and make sure everybody's aware of what we have found to be pretty critical items as we've worked with a number of customers on both GDPR and CCPA privacy. First one being the fact that yes, the CCPA still is to be enforced effective July 1st. A lot of people were wondering if with the COVID and the global pandemic, would that cause things to be backed up? And the answer is no, it is still to be enforced July 1st of this year. The next one is the privacy concerns as a result of the pandemic have actually elevated a bit, largely due to the work from home. About 90% of the organizations, according to IAP, the International Association of Privacy Professionals, about 90% of organizations have put in place policies requiring remote working. So that does open the door and that does expand risk relative to data privacy. And the last point of consideration is the fact that CCPA does introduce a real important point here under the breach notification statute revision. And what it is, it opens the door and provides the private right of action for providers or consumers to take litigation action. All right, so that's a real important point to drive home, is that now through this statute and this revision, the CCPA now opens the door so that if a company has a breach, then, and it's 1 million records, then each record of that breach could open the door for individual litigation or class action litigation. That's a very important point that I wanted to raise. Okay, Brian, next slide. So in addition to the states going through their own version, global aspect of privacy, there's a lot of unknown out there, but there is some known, but there's even more unknown. So how do we deal with this unknown? And I want to highlight 5 areas that we at Prolifics have put together an overall framework and roadmap to accommodate the 5 core capabilities that we consider to be functional and primary, regardless of how the laws ultimately are evolved, whether it's global, whether it's US based or otherwise. And these 5 make up the fundamentals of data privacy, such as discovery and mapping. You've got to understand what holdings you have. You've got to understand where your data is at, who has access to which data, and is that appropriate and legal under the particular privacy laws. The second one is records of processing. So we've got to understand, what are we doing with this data, this sensitive or private data or personal data? What are our activities and processing doing with the data? How are we handling that? Are we selling any? Are we moving it to third-party processors? If we are, then are those third-party processors contracted appropriately with us under the privacy laws? The third one being the subject access request. This is you and I. This is the consumer or the citizen that has access and rights now to manage and to determine how their data is going to be used by a particular organization. You'll hear this referenced as a DSAR, or a data subject access request. So that fundamental capability is core as well. The next one, of course, being the security and the governance aspect. How do we manage that data in our processes? How do we move that data from point to point? Do we delete that data when it's reached its end of life? And if we delete that data, do we discard? And is that data truly gone? And is that risk associated with that piece of data gone as well? And last but not least, is the breach aspect. And while the DSAR, or the subject access request, has been getting a lot of attention recently, the breach aspect has now, because of the new statute under CCPA, the breach aspect is now getting considerable attention as well. So we've included that as one of our 5 core functional capabilities that we recommend companies put in place, even with the obscure and the unknowns of the privacy laws. If you can do these 5 things, then you'll be able to accommodate probably about 90 to 95% of the privacy requirements and legislations that do evolve. Okay, Brian, next slide, please.
Hey, Ron, you're tracking really well. I know you're not hitting the sauce too hard because you're ripping through this pretty quickly. Just a few questions for you here. We don't have to do all this at once, right? July 1st is coming up in just a few weeks. The first audits are going to start coming up after that. Can you just talk a little bit? You're like I said, you're great on time. Talk a little bit about the fact that customers don't have to consume all of this right out of the gate, that they can start in specific areas to get going.
That's correct, Brian. And where we oftentimes will recommend starting is in that discovery and mapping, so that we understand where we're at in terms of our data assets and our data holdings. Where does the risk lie? Do we have data that is in a particular system or in a particular area that is highly sensitive, and is it used in a particular manner that could present elevated risk to us? So of these 5, we typically say that you can't manage or govern or mitigate risk of something that you don't know you have. All right. So step 1 and in a phased approach would be that discovery or mapping. Now, in the next slides, I'll get into the approach that we use to step into and step through mitigating risk through the discovery and the data mapping. All right. And go ahead, Brian, to the next slide. We take at Prolifics, we take a top-down and bottom-up approach. At ABS, we started, and Karen can elaborate on this more as we move through this webinar, but at ABS, we started with a top-down approach. And the reason we at Prolifics like to start with a top-down approach is because with that top-down approach, we can identify through collaborative meetings, review sessions, some assessment activities, we can identify rather quickly and cost effectively where some risk levels lie within your organization. For example, at ABS, within a couple weeks and a series of meetings and workshops, we were able to identify about 20 potential risks within their environment. And that's with no software, no large capital expenses, but a very focused effort with workshops and meetings and good Q&A processes in place that we were able to identify and uncover where those risks are. Okay. Now, the next slide, Brian, please. The next thing we did was we took that top-down, that risk output, and we said, all right, Karen and her executive team, along with her legal counsel, we said, all right, what do these things mean to ABS in terms of risk to our business? Because privacy is just all about risk. There is no one answer for a privacy solution. There is no software, there is no process, there is no one solution. Every company interprets privacy risk differently, and they're willing to accept or not various levels of risk. So what we did was we took that top-down piece and said, here, Karen and your executive team and their legal counsel, here are the risks. Then Karen and team decided that, you know what, those risks represent enough exposure to our company that we now need to do a bottom-up approach. The key point, though, here in the top-down is that in that top-down approach, we have had customers that say, you know what, we've gone far enough with the top-down. We see where the risk is well enough that we can make an educated decision on how we want to manage our privacy concerns at that point. So what we've done is we've come in a rather rapid, cost-effective manner. We've provided very valuable insight, and the critical decisions were able to be made by those organizations at that point. Now, Karen and team, they saw the risk, so that they decided to let us help them go from a bottom-up perspective now, so that we're now actually electronically and to some degree automated fashion discovering the data, the sensitive data, the anomalies, where the risk lies very, very precisely, very broad within their company, yet very focused and precisely exactly where these pieces of data are, every location of that, what they're used for, who has access to them, etc. And I think Karen's going to elaborate a little bit on some of the findings a little bit on that bottom up. Go ahead, Brian, to the next slide, please.
Karen, you want to jump in here since Ron's calling you out before we get to the next section?
Sure. So we had very reluctant executives. They don't think that they have risk. So our CIO, who I'm on her team, we got approval to spend a limited amount of budget to actually do an assessment, as Ron was saying. And that assessment highlighted the risks that ABS had even before we looked at any code, any data whatsoever. So I think it was a very good first step, and that was used and presented to executives to get budget for the next year. And we were in a very bad downturn, but that's one of the areas where we got budget.
Excellent.
So then at that, thanks, Karen. So at that point, then we took the top down, as Karen said, and the bottom up, and able to then bring all of that insight together and then make very comprehensive and very complete assessments on how we're going to now mitigate that risk, all right, and prioritize those steps to mitigate the risk and implement the privacy solution itself, so that if and when we get a request, how do we manage that request? What pieces of data do we need to go to? And so forth. So we now have a very complete picture given the top down and the bottom up approaches. Okay, next slide, Brian. And in this slide, it represents now the fact that a real important point, while this is a bit of an eye chart, you don't need to squint and look at everything. I just have a few points here I want to make out, because this is really where Karen and her leadership team took this to another level. They said, all right, privacy and the GDPR is critical to our environment. We realize that we have risk. We know where a lot of that risk is. We've looked at the data, but you know what? Privacy is not a revenue generator. We don't gain a lot of business value. We mitigate risk. We avoid reputational damage, perhaps. But how do we then take those learnings from the compliance and privacy work that we did, and how do we turn that into advancing our data governance solutions in our practice? And how do we become much better as an organization at managing our data assets? So while stepping through the data privacy work, we invoked this balanced governance framework, and then captured that compliance information, and we're able to, and it's an ongoing thing, but we're able to now leverage the value from the compliance in a whole nother manner, besides just addressing the compliance risk. So we've leveraged that knowledge and information now to move her data, Karen's data governance and data warehousing efforts, move forward to the next levels. So for example, we identified through the data analysis and the scanning and profiling, we identified data quality issues. We identified various data anomalies, data assets that could be leveraged. We identified processes, perhaps processes that could be improved. And we identified people and resources who had knowledge and insight in various pieces of the business and data that we would not have been aware of had we not gone through the compliance. And so we captured all of that insight and structured that into a data governance program that Karen and team are now able to leverage going forward. And that kickstarts and that progresses their data maturity, and now evolve it into maybe more of a data strategy and so forth. So the bottom line point there is to simply say that as you're going through your compliance efforts, there's a lot more rich information and insight you can harvest from those efforts than just meeting the compliance and privacy risk type work or solution. Okay?
Excellent, Ron. Thank you very much. Stick around, because I'm sure we have many more questions for you, and we're going to jump right in, get to the interview portion of this. I've known Karen for quite some time when we went through this process for the assessment. I know you just went through a lot of detail, but in essence, we developed an assessment. We worked with the customer to go from both the bottoms down and the tops down and bottoms up approach. We focused on the data, and we did a lot of interviewing, I know, with the business. And I can tell you, as much as I love Karen, I know she can be very pushed towards the goals and driving us as a partner towards getting this achievement done. And I was very happy to see that. I will tell a small story. I remember working with Karen on this program and pushing to get all these deliverables done and saying, wow, Karen's, she's a good leader because she's driving us really hard. We went out to dinner and went to a steakhouse, and one of the waiters came over with a tray full of cocktails. And Karen was having a Chardonnay. I think I was probably having a Cabernet. Anyway, that waiter didn't know how to hold the glasses down and spilled the entire tray full of cocktails all over the table. And Karen, you were just as sweet as pie. I thought there was going to be more of a it was more of a learning experience overall with the restaurant. We've been to that restaurant many times. I think that waiter though was extremely thankful to have you as a customer sitting at the table, because it went very well, and he was very apologetic. But anyway, let's get to the
more
question.
cocktails.
And we did get more cocktails. That's the great thing about those things. They just refill themselves whenever you ask.
Yeah,
So,
that's
so
true.
Karen, let's start with a little bit of background. I know we did a light overview on the introduction on what the American Bureau of Shipping does. Y'all have been around since 1862. Can you give us a little background on your business?
So we're basically a class society for the shipping industry, and it's not the delivery of things. It's the actually build, construct, and sailing of vessels around the world. And we also do offshore rigs and that kind of thing. And I liken it to two parts of the business. The first side is if you're going to build a home, you get an architect, and that architect has drawings. It takes care of the electricity, the sewage, and all of the lighting, all the things that are required. We do the same thing. An owner goes to a shipbuilder to build a vessel, and they agree on the type of vessel they're going to build, and they start the design of that vessel. Though they have to go through a class society to approve the sailing of that vessel due to insurance and other reasons. We actually came into existence, believe it or not, partly due to the Titanic. That was part of what kind of led to this whole thing. So, so if you build according to the plan, so those drawings are sent to ABS and we have to approve them. We have engineers that verify the IMO, International Maritime Laws around the world that are applied to them. We send those back and forth. As that ship is being built, we then have our surveyors go out and survey that you are actually building to the design and the specifications of that vessel. That's one side of it. The other side is, I liken it to every year you get an annual inspection on your car. For a vessel that's sailing, you have annual surveys. And those surveys are dependent on the type of vessel, the type of flag that you're sailing, where you're going to, the type of cargo that you're carrying. All of those kinds of things play into that. So that's basically our business.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing because people think of a company like yours, and they probably don't understand the global nature of your business overall, nor the amount of people you have spread out over the planet to ensure.
We're in every major port virtually in the world, obviously not Iran and some of those, but almost every other.
Well, great. So let's just push forward and talk about your current role. I know that you take on a lot of responsibility at ABS. You've got a number of programs going. You have an onshore, offshore capacity. Give us a little more highlight on what Karen does every day.
Well, how it started is I was over our corporate applications worldwide, and I griped about data. I griped about data quality. And finally, I think they got tired of hearing about it. So they said, okay, fine, we're going to set up a data governance program. And I made two very important hires. I got two really good people. One of them is on this call, Jerry, who worked on the, she basically took this part of it, which is your compliance, your GDPR and everything. And then we've got another one that kind of went the data automation. But when we started, it was just governance. And we were starting down that road when, you know, kind of the GDPR started rearing its ugly head. So Jerry and I were working with Prolifics because we had some of the tools that they had recommended and were supporting. And we started down that road. And based on the initial findings, we were able to get funding to actually go down this program. This component of data governance and data privacy ended up leading into data automation and really growing my team and data warehouse, analytics, and reporting. So we've just seen a growth of activity, a growth of interest across the organization, particularly this year in light of COVID, because everybody needs data. Everybody wants data, you know, because they can't walk down the hall and ask 3 people to help them. So they're all coming to our group.
Right. Excellent. So let's talk a little bit more about the program then. So, you know, what business challenges did ABS face given the GDPR mandate coming down the pike?
Well, there's several things. We're a global company, so there's data all over the place. We're an old company and we're very old school. So everybody saves everything everywhere. So the first thing we did, because we were having trouble with getting our unstructured program going, we started with structured data. I don't know how many of you are in IT, but in IT, when you implement new systems, when you have an accounting system or an HR system, and you bring other systems into it, like a recruitment system or a talent management system, what you end up having is all of these data flows back and forth, or you create these files. So Jerry was out there one day taking a look, and just by happenstance, she picked a table that we found many of our folks' social security numbers, addresses, all sorts of information. Because what would happen is when you create these files, you know, they're temporary files, but temporary files never went away. So that was really an eye-opening experience, especially being from IT. You know, whether it's sloppy or not, that's the way IT in the past worked because we thought it was secure. So that was the first thing, is we started in removing this data that was not needed anymore or not in the place it should be and not being used for its intended purpose. So it should be stored and accessed only by the people who have rights to see it, not me. So
that's perfect. Okay, so knowing that that was the challenge, how did Prolifics kind of jump in and help you? I know Ron talked about it in a deep detail. If you could just bring us up a level for the folks that are listening in, how did you get engaged with Prolifics beyond the initial tool discussions and really drive out this GDPR
So
approach?
Prolifics was our partner initially when we bought our governance tools and all that, right? And you and I actually were the ones talking one day, and you said, hey, we can do this assessment for GDPR. And that's how the ball got rolling. And since we already had the tools for structured data, we started looking at tools for unstructured data, and we started building out that entire program. Where we have challenge, we have a lot of offices around the globe, China being one of the biggest ones. We're big in Europe, you know, the Greek ship owners and builders. So we have a lot of concerns about GDPR, data privacy. So we took the approach, since GDPR is probably one of the most stringent, at least right now, that we're kind of applying those rules across the organization. And so so our data discovery from an unstructured standpoint started on our SIFs in other parts of the world so that we could reduce that risk. The big glaring piece that we haven't started yet is email, because I think that's one of our biggest risks. So that is in discussions, but we have not started that yet.
Okay. All right, let's jump over to the next one. And that's, how did the process and solution that we worked on together help you drive towards compliance?
Well, when I showed up to my CIO and said, by the way, I've seen your social security number, that got action and attention really quickly. So, the tools that you guys worked with us to pick and then help us implement. Our team, we've been in ABS in the shipping industry in general has been really down. So we're very, very, very lean. So Prolifics has been a partner with us throughout this whole thing. And I think Jerry would say as well, we've got very critical resources on this whole process with us and that have helped to make us successful and to identify the risks that ABS has and continue to do that.
Thanks for that, Karen. I know that one of the things we did out of the gate was to bring some resources to bear that could move into your offshore offices in India and become part of your team. So that was a way in which we could keep the costs down, but also provide local talent to kind of expand your team and give you that on-demand set of resources. And I know we've kind of turned the volume up and down on that over the years.
Well, that's been critical because not only did you help us with our data discovery, GDPR, data privacy, whatever, you also were critical in the implementation of another system where there was data movement, a lot of ETL work. And you guys, we really beefed up that team over in India.
So are we done? Are we done?
Done with?
Does the work stop there? Sorry, are we finished? Is it ever finished?
Not GDPR, not data privacy, and not data governance. It never stops. It's just like anything else. You've got to, what is it? We're actually going through, let's discover, let's remediate, let's go back and discover, right, to see that they remediated and also what new findings they are, because people make mistakes every day. We found all sorts of stuff. So one of the very first things we did when we were just kind of doing a POC to see if we wanted anything, we started looking at files in one of our SIFs, and I drilled down, and what we saw is because we're an international company, we have invitation letters when people go to other countries. So I drilled into one of my buddies, and the invitation letter had his passport, his age, all sorts of information. So, and that was back in 2003. So it's been sitting out there all that time. Now, his passport has probably changed. He's a whole lot older, but I still had a whole lot of information, date of birth and whatever, that should have been removed years and years before.
Okay. Interesting. It's always the data that gets you in trouble.
It is.
So let's talk a little bit about differences, right? We've got everyone's concerned about CCPA. We talked about that mandate. The fact of the matter is it's coming down the pike and people are going to have to do something about it. Ron showed us a diagram of the United States and all the laws that are coming. I know I've been talking to customers in many different states about CCPA, but every other state compliance mandate that's coming. Based on your feedback and what you know, what's the difference? I know GDPR is heavier. What's the difference for you between these two?
Well, CCPA plays much less of a role for us because it's not near as critical for not-for-profit, which is what we are. We've set the standard for GDPR, but we're big in China. We're big in Korea. We're big in the European Union. So, and then we're starting to see mumblings of and murmurs of restrictions in South America or data privacy laws. So, we established the standard as GDPR, but if and as laws to particular countries apply, we have the tools that we can actually do that with.
Great. So basically what you're saying is the fundamental things that are between these policies are all basically rooted in data and the process to control, secure, and manage that data. So you could build upon what you have, no matter what country decides they're going to put boxes around your information or controls around it.
Yes, and because, you know, in our particular case, we have people around the world. There are some countries that want to know your religion. That's a requirement. Well, in some countries, if you were to put that religion out there, that could cause you a big problem. So securing that kind of information and other kinds of information is really, really important, particularly for us, because we are global in nature. And we, you know, every ethnicity, every whatever you want to say, we probably got it.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And I think you already answered this next question, Karen, that we added. Obviously, you know, we helped to develop the assessment. We tailored and tuned that towards ABS. We went through the interviews, we went through the data scanning and put together the processes. Is there anything else that Prolifics helped you with that you want to call out, or should we jump to the next one?
I think Prolifics has been a great partner. If there was an issue and you knew I was upset, you guys immediately tried to jump on it and help us get it resolved. So I think that, you know, that's what makes a true team. It's not a us and them. It's how are we successful together? And I think that's really important.
That too, Brian, on that point too, is we've always taken the approach, like I said, in the top-down method, is it's not about, from Prolific's perspective, it's not just about selling software. So it's helping you understand where your risk is and doing that as quickly and as efficiently and effectively as possible. And again, that's one of the main reasons we oftentimes start with the top down, because we don't want to just assume as soon as we walk in the door that you're going to need this tool or that tool or this tool or that tool. And we don't just assume that unless you have that's what you use for. But we
I will say one of our biggest challenges is getting our executive team to understand the commitment that needs to be made right to this. So, you know, Prolifics has been good in working with us. It's kind of funny because just a couple weeks ago, out of the blue, our chairman wanted to know about our governance component. Well, you know, we've been trying to tell him, Jerry can tell you, we've been trying for 2 years. And all of a sudden we were scrambling to send him the policies we put in place, the data quality things that we've done, what we've found and what we've cleaned up. So it was kind of funny that out of the blue. And then the next thing is he wanted to know all about the data warehouse. So then I was scrambling, lost electricity, had to drive somewhere where I could get electricity so I could finish that darn presentation for a chairman. So they've got interest now. And they're also realizing how important data quality is, right? So you need to govern it and manage it, because at the end of the day, you're trying to gather insights on that data, right?
Right.
So, and by the way, data is one of a company's most valuable assets, particularly if it's used correctly. And it can be used time and over again in many different ways. And you can learn and glean new insights and information with that data.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think when people think about compliance, they think about rushing to the finish line or meeting regulators' requirements or checking the box, and they don't really think about the consumability of knowing your data better and using that for downstream applications, better customer care, better data assessments, better reporting, better financial transactional reporting. You know, people tend to just look at it as this box of compliance is making me do something, not the what else can I do with it until they get through it.
I think that's true, but it's also the other thing when I was presenting budget last year. So the chairman and the president both looked at me and said, "Oh, so you'll be done after this?" No, this is a program. just like data security or security into your systems, it doesn't go away. You have to continually monitor, remediate, improve, right? So it never stops.
Right.
You're
All right.
securing one of your biggest assets within the company, right? And we actually class Navy ships and all that. So we also have to make sure that data is secure, right? So you start getting into DFARS and all that kind of stuff, which leads me to some of the tools that we purchased. If we have to look at CUI data and some of the other things, we have some of the tools that could actually apply those rules. They could give us the rules that we could then do discovery and apply those rules to identify those files or whatever that have that kind of data in it. That was actually
Excellent.
brought up this morning, Ron, in case you want to know.
Well, Karen, I promise this is the last question, then we'll let the folks out there pile on any questions they want. It's not what kind of wine do you have in your glass? I'm assuming it's Chardonnay. I think I know you well enough.
Nope, it's Sauvignon Blanc, remember?
Oh, you know what? I knew that from yesterday. We both moved on to Sauvignon Blanc. So cheers to your Sauvignon Blanc. Here's the final question. You know, I think you've gone through like the tactical, the process benefits, but I also think you hit on the long-term benefits. But at a high level, what is the biggest benefit that ABS would receive from having gone through this, other than the obvious?
Well, I think there's a couple. Obviously, we're identifying, reducing our risk, but also I think it's with your customers, because if they know you have a program, you know, we don't handle as much data as a lot of companies. We still handle people's personal information, and particularly some of the board members and some of our Greek owners and different things around the world, other owners around the world. They feel confident, or much more confident, knowing that we're responsible with our data, right? From a security perspective, from a privacy perspective, from a management perspective, and that we don't share it and give it to people and use it in an unintended way. So it's respecting that ability and being able to partner with your customers, and they have complete confidence that you're doing what's best for them.
Perfect. Thank you, Karen. I'm going to move over to the audience participation portion of this. We've got a few questions in the chat. I will throw them out to you. The first one comes in from Mark Petronic, and he's asking about the chances for data governance. What are the chances for success with data governance when you have to work mostly in a bottoms-up fashion without a strong executive top-down mandate? And I think you did hit on the top-down, so you can just round that out.
We've got the same challenge. We pulled our hair out, right? I mean, we put together, we worked with Prolifics, but we put together an overall program. We set up committees. We did all of that information. We did a maturity model, and they were implementing this huge system last year. So for 2 years, we've been brushed off. 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, all of a sudden, they're asking all these questions because data is important. So I share your pain. What I would say is move forward. One of the things we did is we did a couple of newsletters that we sent out to the company, but it's something we should probably revisit again, starting to make people aware, right? It's a slow and sometimes painful process, but we seem to be making some strides in that. So document, have it at the touch of a finger. So if you need to send it, you can show your progress.
Excellent. Next one for you, Karen, comes from Tim. Tim's asking, how quickly did you realize value from the work effort that you deployed?
From what effort?
The work effort overall, the program. How quickly did you see value?
I think the day Jerry walked in my office and said, Karen, you're not going to believe what I just found. And then my CIO was traveling, and the next week she was back, and we were coming out of a meeting. I just reached over and I said, by the way, I've got a whole lot of Social Security numbers. And she's like, you got to get rid of that. But the biggest eye-opening thing, I think, for me is, you know, we in IT tend to be a little arrogant, right? We think everybody else is sloppy and we're responsible.
Of course.
IT, we had a whole lot of data out there in temporary tables that we didn't take care of. And it's just the way you did things. You didn't go back and clean up. So, you know, don't throw stones at your glass house when you haven't cleaned your own. So that's the biggest eye opener for me.
Very good point. And the last one I'll ask you, I think this goes back to less of the program and more about yourself. And it probably applies to Jerry as well and your overall team. And that's, how did you go about learning, you know, the very wide and deep subject of data governance? How did you evolve, immerse, and educate yourself in this as you were pushing this program?
You got to have a passion, right? And I have a very strong team, and I don't have, in my opinion, a weak link on my team. And so Jerry has a passion for understanding and implementing a process, just like I think the rest of us do. So if you don't have that passion, it makes it harder, because it's more than just doing A, B, and C and implementing. It's communicating with others. It's getting buy-in with your legal team. It's getting buy-in with the executives, albeit very painful and slow sometimes. Because at the end of the day, you're an overhead cost. So you have to put it in a perspective that what is the risk to ABS if we don't comply? What are the potential dollar values that could hurt us? What is the potential? Because we're not like a Target. If they have a breach, you know, you lose 10,000 customers, you still got hundreds of thousands more. You know, if we lose several owners, it could really hit our business. So it's understanding that risk and trying to deal with it.
Excellent. Well, I will say on behalf of all of us, Karen, cheers to you and your team. I appreciate you joining us today. I know.
Cheers.
I know it's weird being virtual. I can't wait to see you in Houston in person again, or whenever we can get somewhere else other than being little squares on a screen. So thank you again, and thank you to everyone that's joined us. I appreciate your coming out to talk to us. If you have any compliance questions, this is our email address here, solutions@Prolifics. We're going to be hosting many more digital events. Again, we appreciate you taking the time with us today. Have a great rest of your day, and cheers to you all as well. Thank you.
Thanks,
Cheers.
everyone. Take care.